Chapter 6. How Sex Drives Evolution. It cannot be supposed, for instance, that male birds of paradise, or peacocks, should take such pains in erecting, spreading, and vibrating their beautiful plumes before the females for no purpose. Charles Darwin. There are few animals in nature more resplendent than a male peacock in full display. With his iridescent blue-green tail, studded with eye spots, fanned out in full glory behind a shiny blue body. But the bird seems to violate every aspect of Darwinism, for the traits that make him beautiful are at the same time maladaptive for survival. That long tail produces aerodynamic problems in flight, as anyone knows who has ever seen a peacock struggle to become airborne. This surely makes it hard for the birds to get up to their nighttime roosts in the trees and to escape predators, especially during the monsoons when a wet tail is literally a drag. The sparkling colors, too, attract predators, especially compared to the females, who are short-tailed and camouflaged a drab greenish-brown. And a lot of metabolic energy is diverted to the male's striking tail, which must be completely regrown each year. Not only does the peacock's plumage seem pointless, but it's an impediment. How could it possibly be an adaptation? And if individuals with such plumage left more genes, as one would expect if the raiment evolved by natural selection, how come the females aren't equally resplendent? In a letter to the American biologist Asa Gray in 1860, Darwin griped about these questions. I remember well the time when the thought of the eye made me cold all over, but I have got over this stage of complaint, and now trifling particulars of structure often make me uncomfortable. The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick. Enigmas like the peacock's tail abound. Take the extinct Irish elk, actually a misnomer, for it's neither exclusively Irish nor an elk. It is, in fact, the largest deer ever described, and lived throughout Europe and Asia. Males of this species, which disappeared only about 10,000 years ago, were the proud possessors of an enormous pair of antlers, spanning more than 12 feet from tip to tip. Together weighing about 90 pounds, they sat atop a paltry 5-pound skull. Think of the stress that would cause. It's like walking around all day carrying a teenager on your head. And like the peacock's tail, these antlers were completely regrown from scratch each year. In addition to gaudy traits, there are strange behaviors seen in only one sex. Male Tungara frogs of Central America use their inflatable vocal sacs to sing a long serenade each night. The songs attract the attention of females, but also of bats and blood-sucking flies, which prey on singing males far more often than on the non-calling females. In Australia, male bowerbirds build large and bizarre bowers out of sticks that, depending on the species, are shaped like tunnels, mushrooms, or tents. They are festooned with decorations, flowers, snail shells, berries, seed pods, and, where humans are nearby, bottle caps, pieces of glass, and tinfoil. These bowers take hours, sometimes days to erect. Some are nearly 10 feet across and 5 feet tall, and yet they're not used as nests. Why do males go to all this trouble? We don't have to just speculate, as Darwin did, that these traits reduce survival. In recent years, scientists have actually shown how costly they can be. The male red-collared widow bird is shiny black, sporting a deep crimson necklace and head patch and laden with immensely long tail feathers, roughly twice as long as its body. Anybody seeing the male in flight, struggling through the air with its tail flopping behind, has to wonder what that tail is all about. Sarah Pryke and Stefan Andersson of Sweden's Gothenburg University captured a group of males in South America and trimmed their tails, removing about an inch in one group and 4 inches in another. Recapturing the males over the breeding season, they found that longer-tailed males lost significantly more weight than shorter-tailed males. Clearly, those extended tails are a considerable handicap. And so are bright colors, as demonstrated in a clever experiment on the collared lizard. In this foot-long lizard that lives in the western United States, the sexes look very different. Males sport a turquoise body, yellow head, black neck collars, and black and white spots, while the less gaudy females are grayish-brown and only lightly spotted. To test the hypothesis that the male's bright color attracts more predators, Jerry Cusack and his colleagues at Oklahoma State University put out in the desert clay models painted to look like male and female lizards. The soft clay would preserve the bite marks of any predators, mistaking the models for real animals. After only a week, 35 of the 40 garish male models showed bite marks, mostly by snakes and birds, while none of the 40 drab female models were attacked. Traits that differ between males and females of a species, such as tails, color, and songs, are called sexual dimorphisms, from the Greek for two forms. Figure 23 shows a few examples. Over and over, biologists have found that sexually dimorphic traits in males seem to violate evolutionary theory, for they waste time and energy and reduce survival. Colorful male guppies are eaten more often than are the plainer females. The male black wheatear, a Mediterranean bird, laboriously erects large cairns of stone in various locations, piling up 50 times his own weight in pebbles over a period of 2 weeks. Male sage grouse perform elaborate displays, strutting up and down the prairie, flapping their wings and making loud sounds from 2 large vocal sacs. These shenanigans can use up a tremendous amount of energy for a bird. 1 day's display burns up the caloric equivalent of a banana split. If selection is responsible for these traits, and it should be given their complexity, we need to explain how. The solutions. Before Darwin, sexual dimorphism was a mystery. Creationists then, as now, could not explain why a supernatural designer should produce features in one sex and only one sex that harm its survival. As the great explainer of nature's diversity, Darwin was naturally anxious to understand how these seemingly pointless traits evolved. He finally noticed the key to their explanation. If traits differ between males and females of a species, the elaborate behaviors, structures, and ornaments are nearly always restricted to males. By now, you might have guessed how these costly traits evolved. Remember that the currency of selection is not really survival, but successful reproduction. Having a fancy tail or a seductive song doesn't help you survive, but may increase your chances of having offspring, and that's how these flamboyant traits and behaviors arose. Darwin was the first to recognize this trade-off and coined the name for the type of selection responsible for sexual dimorphic features: sexual selection. Sexual selection is simply selection that increases an individual's chance of getting a mate. It's really just a subset of natural selection, but one that deserves its own chapter because of the unique way it operates and the seemingly non-adaptive adaptations it produces. Sexually selected traits evolve if they more than offset the male's diminished survival with an increase in his reproduction. Maybe widow birds with longer tails don't evade predators very well, but females might prefer the longer-tailed males as mates. Deer with bigger antlers might struggle to survive under a metabolic burden, but perhaps they win jousting contests more frequently, thereby siring more offspring. Sexual selection comes in 2 forms. One, exemplified by the Irish elk's huge antlers, is direct competition between males for access to females. The other, the one that produces the widow bird's long tail, is female choosiness among possible mates. Male-male competition, or in Darwin's oft pugnacious terminology, the law of battle, is the easiest to understand. As Darwin noted, it is certain that with almost all animals there is a struggle between the males for the possession of the female. When males of a species battle it out directly, be it through the clashing antlers of deer, the stabbing horns of the stag beetle, the head-butting of stalk-eyed flies, or the bloody battles of massive elephant seals, they win access to females by driving off competitors. Selection will favor any trait that promotes such victories, so long as the increased chance of getting mates more than offsets any reduced survival. This kind of selection produces armaments, stronger weapons, larger body size, or anything that helps a male win physical contests. In contrast, features such as bright colors, ornaments, bowers, and mating displays are molded by the second type of sexual selection, mate choice. To female eyes, it seems, not all males are the same. They find some male traits and behaviors more attractive than others, so genes that produce those features accumulate in populations. There is also an element of competition between males in this scenario, but it is indirect. Winning males have the loudest voices, the brightest colors, the most alluring pheromones, the sexiest displays, and so on. But in contrast to male-male competition, here the winner is decided by the females. In both types of sexual selection, males compete for females. Why isn't it the other way around? We'll learn shortly that it all rests on the difference in size between two tiny cells, the sperm and the egg. Is it really true, though, that males who win contests, or are more highly ornamented, or perform the best displays actually get more mates? If they don't, the whole theory of sexual selection collapses. In fact, the evidence strongly and consistently supports the theory. Let's start with contests. The northern elephant seal of North America's Pacific coast shows extreme sexual dimorphism for size. Females are roughly 10 feet long and weigh about 1,500 pounds, while males are nearly twice as long and can weigh up to 6,000 pounds, bigger than a Volkswagen and more than twice as heavy. They are also polygynous. That is, males mate with more than one female during the breeding season. About a third of the males guard harems of females with whom they couple, up to 100 mates for an alpha male, while the rest of the males are doomed to bachelorhood. Who wins and who loses the mating lottery is determined by fierce contests between males before the females even haul out on the beach. These contests get bloody, with the big bulls bashing their massive bodies together, inflicting deep neck wounds with their teeth, and setting up a dominance hierarchy that has the largest males at the top. When the females do arrive, the dominant males herd them into their harems and drive off approaching rivals. In a given year, most pups are sired by just a few of the largest males. This is male competition, pure and simple, and the prize is reproduction. It is easy to see how, given this mating system, sexual selection promotes the evolution of large, fierce males. Bigger males leave their genes to the next generation, smaller ones don't. Females, who don't have to fight, are presumably close to their optimal weight for reproduction. Sexual dimorphism of body size in many species, including our own, may be due to competition between males for access to females. Male birds often compete fiercely over real estate. In many species, males attract females only by controlling a patch of land, one with good vegetation that is suitable for nesting. Once they have their patch, males defend it with visual and vocal displays, as well as direct attacks on encroaching males. Many of the bird songs that delight our ears are actually threats, warning other males to keep away. The red-winged blackbird of North America defends territories in open habitats, usually freshwater marshes. Like elephant seals, this species is polygynous, with some males having as many as 15 females nesting in their territory. Many other males, called floaters, go unmated. Floaters constantly try to invade established territories to sneak copulations with females, keeping resident males busy driving them away. Up to a quarter of a male's time can be spent vigilantly protecting his turf. Besides direct patrolling, red-winged males defend their territories by singing complex songs and making threat displays with their eponymous ornament, a bright red epaulet on the shoulder. Females are brown, sometimes with a small vestigial epaulet. The epaulets aren't there to attract females. Rather, they are used to threaten other males in the battle for territories. When experimenters effaced the epaulets of males by painting them black, 70% of males lost their territories, compared to only 10% of control males painted with a clear solvent. The epaulets probably keep intruders away by signaling that a territory is occupied. Song is also important. Muted males, temporarily deprived of their ability to sing, also lose territories. In blackbirds, then, song and plumage help a male get more mates. In the studies described above, and many others as well, researchers have shown that sexual selection is acting because males with more elaborate features get a greater payoff in offspring. This conclusion seems simple, but required hundreds of hours of tedious fieldwork by inquisitive biologists. Sequencing DNA in a gleaming lab may seem far more glamorous, but the only way a scientist can tell us how selection acts in nature is to get dirty in the field. Sexual selection doesn't end with the sex act itself. Males can continue to compete even after mating. In many species, females mate with more than one male over a short period of time. After a male inseminates a female, how can he prevent other males from fertilizing her and stealing his paternity? This post-mating competition has produced some of the most intriguing features built by sexual selection. Sometimes a male hangs around after mating, guarding his female against other suitors. When you see a pair of dragonflies attached to each other, it's likely that the male is simply guarding the female after having fertilized her, physically blocking access by other males. A Central American millipede has taken mate guarding to the extreme. After fertilizing a female, the male simply rides her for several days, preventing any competitor from claiming her eggs. Chemicals can also do this job. The ejaculate of some snakes and rodents contains substances that temporarily plug up a female's reproductive tract after mating, barricading out other probing males. In the group of fruit flies on which I work, the male injects the female with an anti-aphrodisiac, a chemical in his semen that makes her unwilling to remate for several days. Males use a variety of defensive weapons to guard their paternity. But they can be even more devious. Many have offensive weapons to get rid of the sperm from previously mating males and replace it with their own. One of the cleverest devices is the penis scoop of some damselflies. When a male mates with an already mated female, he uses backward-pointing spines on his penis to scoop out the sperm of earlier mating males. Only after she's despermed does he transfer his own sperm. In Drosophila, my own lab found that a male's ejaculate contains substances that inactivate the stored sperm of males who mated previously. What about the second form of sexual selection, mate choice? Compared to male-male competition, we know a lot less about how this process works. That's because the significance of colors, plumage, and display is far less obvious than that of antlers and other weapons. To figure out how mate choice evolves, let's begin with that pesky peacock tail that caused Darwin such angst. Much of the work on mate choice in the peacock has been done by Marion Petrie and her colleagues, who study a free-ranging population in Whipsnade Park, Bedfordshire, England. In this species, males assemble at leks, areas where they all display together, giving females an opportunity to compare them directly. Not all males join the lek, but only the ones who do can win a female. One observational study of 10 lekking males showed a strong correlation between the number of eye spots in a male's tail feathers and the number of matings he achieved. The most elaborate male, with 160 eye spots, garnered 36% of all copulations. This suggests that more elaborate tails are preferred by females, but doesn't prove it. It's possible that some other aspect of male courtship, say, the vigor of his display, is really what females are choosing, and this just happens to be correlated with plumage. To rule this out, one can do experimental manipulations. Change the number of eye spots on the tail of a peacock and see if this affects his ability to get mates. Remarkably, such an experiment was suggested in 1869 by Darwin's competitor, Alfred Russel Wallace. Although the two men agreed on many things, most notably natural selection, they parted ways when it came to sexual selection. The idea of male-male competition was no problem for either man, but Wallace frowned on the possibility of female choice. Nevertheless, he kept an open mind on this issue and was way ahead of his time in suggesting how to test it. The part that remains to be played by ornament alone will be very small, even if it were proved, which it is not, that a slight superiority in ornament alone usually determines the choice of a mate. This, however, is a matter that admits of experiment, and I would suggest that either some zoological society or any person having the means should try such experiments. A dozen male birds of the same age, domestic fowls, common pheasants or gold pheasants, for instance, should be chosen, all known to be acceptable to the hen birds. Half of these should have one or two tail plumes cut off, or the neck plumes a little shortened, just enough to produce such a difference as occurs by variation in nature, but not enough to disfigure the bird. And then observe whether the hens take any notice of the deficiency, and whether they uniformly reject the less ornamented males. Such experiments, carefully made and judiciously varied for a few seasons, would give most valuable information on this interesting question. In fact, such experiments weren't done until more than a century later. But the results are now in, and female choice is common. In one experiment, Marion Petrie and Tim Halliday cut 20 eye spots off the tail of every male in a group of peacocks, and compared their mating success to that of a control group that was handled but not clipped. Sure enough, in the next breeding season, the de-ornamented males each averaged 2.5 fewer matings than the control males. This experiment clearly suggests that females prefer males whose ornaments had not been reduced. But ideally, we'd also like to do the experiment in the other direction. Make the tails more elaborate and see if that enhances mating success. While this is hard to do in peacocks, it's been done in the territorial African long-tailed widow bird by the Swedish biologist Malte Andersson. In this sexually dimorphic species, males have tails about 20 inches long, females about 3 inches. By removing parts of the long male tails and gluing some of these removed parts onto normal tails, Andersson created males with abnormally short tails, 6 inches, normal control tails, a piece cut off and then glued back on, and long tails, 30 inches. As expected, short-tailed males acquired fewer females nesting on their territory compared to normal males. But males with the artificially long tails gained a whopping increase in matings, attracting nearly twice as many females as did normal males. This raises a question. If males with 30-inch tails won more females, why haven't widow birds evolved tails that long in the first place? We don't know the answer, but it's likely that having tails that long would reduce a male's longevity more than they would increase his ability to get mates. 20 inches is probably the length at which total reproductive output, averaged over a lifetime, is near its maximum. And what do those male sage grouse gain from their arduous antics on the prairie? Again, the answer is mates. Like peacocks, male sage grouse form leks where they display en masse to inspecting females. It's been shown that only the most vigorous males, who strut about 800 times per day, win females, while the vast majority of males go unmated. Sexual selection also explains the architectural feats of bower birds. Several studies have shown that the types of bower decorations, which differ in each species, are correlated with mating success. Satin bower birds, for example, get more mates if they put more blue feathers in their bowers. In spotted bower birds, the most success is achieved by displaying green solanum berries, a species related to wild tomatoes. Joa Madden from Cambridge University stripped the decorations from spotted bower bird bowers and then offered the males a choice of 60 objects. Sure enough, they redecorated their bowers mainly with solanum berries, placing them in the most conspicuous positions on the bower. I've concentrated on birds because biologists have found it easiest to study mate choice in that group. birds are active during the day and easy to observe. But there are many examples of mate choice in other animals. Female Tungara frogs prefer to mate with males who bellow the most complex calls. Female guppies like males with longer tails and more colored spots. Female spiders and fish often prefer larger males. In his exhaustive book, Sexual Selection, Malte Anderson describes 232 experiments in 186 species, showing that a huge variety of male traits are correlated with mating success, and the vast majority of these tests involve female choice. There is simply no doubt that female choice has driven the evolution of many sexual dimorphisms. Darwin was right after all. So far, we've neglected two important questions. Why do females get to do the choosing, while males must woo or fight for them? And why do females choose at all? To answer these questions, we must first understand why organisms bother to have sex. Why sex? Why sex evolved is in fact one of evolution's greatest mysteries. Any individual who reproduces sexually, that is, by making eggs or sperm that contain only half of its genes, sacrifices 50% of its genetic contribution to the next generation, compared to an individual who reproduces asexually. Let's look at it this way. Suppose that there was a gene in humans whose normal form led to sexual reproduction, but whose mutant form enabled a female to reproduce parthenogenetically, by producing eggs that develop without fertilization. Some animals really do reproduce this way. It's been seen in aphids, fish, and lizards. The first mutant woman would have only daughters, who themselves would produce more daughters. In contrast, non-mutant, sexually reproducing women would have to mate with males, producing half sons and half daughters. The proportion of women in the population would quickly begin to rise above 50% as the pool of females became increasingly full of mutants who produce only daughters. In the end, all the females would be produced by asexually reproducing mothers. Males would become superfluous and disappear. No mutant females would need to mate with them, and all females would give birth to only more females. The gene for parthenogenesis would have outcompeted the gene for sexual reproduction. You can show theoretically that in each generation the asexual gene would produce twice as many copies of itself as did the original sexual gene. Biologists call this situation the twofold cost of sex. The bottom line is that under natural selection, genes for parthenogenesis spread quickly, eliminating sexual reproduction. But this hasn't happened. The vast majority of Earth's species reproduce sexually, and that form of reproduction has been around for over 1 billion years. Why hasn't the cost of sex led to its replacement by parthenogenesis? Clearly, sex must have some huge evolutionary advantage that outweighs its cost. Although we haven't yet figured out exactly what that advantage is, there's no shortage of theories. The key may well lie in the random shuffling of genes that occurs during sexual reproduction, which produces new combinations of genes in the offspring. By bringing together several favorable genes in one individual, sex might promote faster evolution to deal with aspects of the environment that are constantly changing, like the parasites that relentlessly evolve to counter our own evolving defenses. Or perhaps, sex could purge bad genes from a species by recombining them together into one severely disadvantaged individual, a genetic scapegoat. Yet biologists still question whether any known advantage outweighs the twofold cost of sex. Once sex has evolved, however, sexual selection follows inevitably if we can explain just two more things. First, why are there just two, rather than 3 or more, sexes that must mate and combine their genes to produce offspring? And second, why do the two sexes have different numbers and sizes of gametes? Males produce a lot of small sperm, females fewer but larger eggs. The question of the number of sexes is a messy theoretical issue that needn't detain us, except to note That theory shows that two sexes will evolutionarily replace mating systems involving 3 or more sexes. Two sexes is the most robust and stable strategy. The theory of why the two sexes have different numbers and sizes of gametes is equally messy. This condition presumably evolved from that in earlier sexually reproducing species, in which the two sexes had gametes of equal size. Theoreticians have shown rather convincingly that natural selection will favor changing this ancestral state into a state in which one sex, the one we call male, makes a lot of small gametes, sperm or pollen, and the other, female, makes fewer but larger gametes, known as eggs. It's this asymmetry in the size of gametes that sets the stage for all of sexual selection, for it causes the two sexes to evolve different mating strategies. Take males. A male can produce large quantities of sperm, and so can potentially father a huge number of offspring, limited only by the number of females he can attract and the competitive ability of his sperm. Things are different for females. Eggs are expensive and limited in number, and if a female mates many times over a short period, she does little, if anything, to increase her number of offspring. A vivid demonstration of this difference can be seen by looking up the record number of children sired by a human female versus a male. If you were to guess the maximum number of children that a woman could produce in a lifetime, you might say around 15. Guess again. The Guinness Book of World Records gives the official record number of children for a woman as 69, produced by an 18th century Russian peasant. In 27 pregnancies between 1725 and 1745, she had 16 pairs of twins, 7 sets of triplets, and 4 sets of quadruplets. She presumably had some physiological or genetic predisposition to multiple births. One weeps for this belabored woman, but her record is far surpassed by that of a male, one Mulai Ismail, 1646 to 1727, an emperor of Morocco. Ismail was reported by Guinness as having fathered at least 342 daughters and 525 sons, and by 1721 he was reputed to have 700 male descendants. Even at these extremes, then, males outstrip females more than tenfold. The evolutionary difference between males and females is a matter of differential investment. Investment in expensive eggs versus cheap sperm. Investment in pregnancy, when females retain and nourish the fertilized eggs. And investment in parental care in the many species in which females alone raise the young. For males, mating is cheap. For females, it's expensive. For males, a mating costs only a small dose of sperm. For females, it costs much more. The production of large, nutrient-rich eggs, and often a huge expenditure of energy and time. In more than 90% of mammal species, a male's only investment in offspring is his sperm, for females provide all the parental care. This asymmetry between males and females in potential numbers of mates and offspring leads to conflicting interests when it comes time to choose a mate. Males have little to lose by mating with a substandard female, say one who is weak or sickly, because they can easily mate again, and repeatedly. Selection then favors genes that make a male promiscuous, relentlessly trying to mate with nearly any female, or anything bearing the slightest resemblance to a female. Male sage-grouse, for instance, sometimes try to mate with piles of cow manure, and, as we learned earlier, some orchids get pollinated by luring randy male bees to copulate with their petals. Females are different. Because of their higher investment in eggs and offspring, their best tactic is to be picky rather than promiscuous. Females must make each opportunity count by choosing the best possible father to fertilize their limited number of eggs. They should therefore inspect potential mates very closely. What this adds up to is that, in general, males must compete for females. Males should be promiscuous, females coy. The life of a male should be one of internecine conflict, constantly vying with his fellows for mates. The good males, either more attractive or more vigorous, will often secure a large number of mates. They will presumably be preferred by more females too, while substandard males go unmated. Almost all females, on the other hand, will eventually find mates. Since every male is competing for them, their distribution of mating success will be more even. Biologists describe this difference by saying that the variance in mating success should be higher for males than females. Is it? Yes. We often see such a difference. In the red deer, for example, the variation among males in how many offspring they leave during their lifetime is 3 times higher than that of females. The disparity is even greater for elephant seals, in which fewer than 10% of all males leave any offspring over several breeding seasons, compared to more than half of the females. The difference between males and females in their potential number of offspring drives the evolution of both male-male competition and female choice. Males must compete to fertilize a limited number of eggs. That's why we see the law of battle, the direct competition between males to leave their genes to the next generation. And that is also why males are colorful or have displays, mating calls, bowers, and the like, for that is their way of saying, "Pick me, pick me." And it is ultimately female preference that drives the evolution of longer tails, more vigorous displays, and louder songs in males. Now, the scenario I have just described is a generalization, and there are exceptions. Some species are monogamous, with both males and females providing parental care. Evolution can favor monogamy if males have more offspring by helping with child care than if they abandon their offspring to seek more matings. In many birds, for example, 2 full-time parents are required. When one goes off to forage, the other incubates the eggs. But monogamous species are not that common in the wild. Only 2% of all mammal species, for instance, have this type of mating system. Further, there are explanations for sexual dimorphism in body size that do not involve sexual selection. In the fruit flies I study, for example, females may be larger simply because they need to produce large and costly eggs. Or males and females might be more efficient predators if they specialize on different food items. Natural selection for reduced competition between members of the 2 sexes could lead them to evolve differences in body size. This may explain a dimorphism in some lizards and hawks, in which females are larger than males and also catch larger prey. Breaking the rules. Curiously, we also see sexual dimorphisms in many socially monogamous species, those in which males and females pair up and rear young together. Since males don't seem to be competing for females, why have they evolved bright colors and ornaments? This seeming contradiction actually provides further support for sexual selection theory. It turns out that in these cases, appearances are deceiving. The species are socially monogamous, but not actually monogamous. One of these species is the splendid fairy wren of Australia, studied by my University of Chicago colleague, Stephen Pruitt-Jones. At first glance, this species looks like the paragon of monogamy. Males and females usually spend their entire adult lives socially bonded to each other, and they co-defend their territory and share parental care. Yet they show striking sexual dimorphism in plumage. Males are a gorgeous iridescent blue and black, while females are a dull grayish-brown. Why? Because adultery is rife. When it comes time to mate, females mate with other males more often than they do with their social mate. This is shown by DNA paternity analysis. Males play the same game, actively seeking and soliciting extra-pair matings, but they still vary far more than females in their reproductive success. Sexual selection associated with these adulterous couplings almost certainly produced the evolution of color differences between the sexes. This wren is not unique in its behavior. Although 90% of all bird species are socially monogamous, in fully 3/4 of these species, males and females mate with individuals other than their social partner. Sexual selection theory makes testable predictions. If only one sex has bright plumage or antlers, performs vigorous mating displays, or builds elaborate structures to lure females, you can bet that it is members of that sex who compete to mate with members of the other. And species showing less sexual dimorphism in behavior or appearance should be more monogamous. If males and females pair up and don't stray from their mates, there is no sexual competition and therefore no sexual selection. Indeed, biologists see strong correlations between mating systems and sexual dimorphism. Extreme dimorphisms in size, color, or behavior are found in those species, like the birds of paradise or elephant seals, in which males compete for females, and only a few males get most of the matings. Species in which males and females look similar, for instance, geese, penguins, pigeons, and parrots, tend to be truly monogamous, exemplars of animal fidelity. This correlation is another triumph for evolutionary theory, for it is predicted only by the idea of sexual selection and not by any creationist alternative. Why should there be a correlation between color and mating system unless evolution is true? Indeed, it is creationists rather than evolutionists who should become sick at the sight of a peacock's feather. So far, we've talked about sexual selection as if the promiscuous sex is always male and the picky sex female. But sometimes, albeit rarely, it's the other way around. And when these behaviors switch between the sexes, so does the direction of dimorphism. We see this reversal in those most appealing of fish, seahorses, and their close relatives, the pipefish. In some of these species, the males rather than the females become pregnant. How can that happen? Although the female does produce eggs, after a male fertilizes them, he places them in a specialized brood pouch on his belly or tail, and carries them about until they hatch. Males carry only one brood at a time, and their gestation period lasts longer than it takes a female to produce a fresh batch of eggs. Males, then, actually invest more in child-rearing than do females. Also, because there are more females carrying unfertilized eggs than males to accept them, females must compete for the rare, non-pregnant males. Here, the male-female difference in reproductive strategy is reversed. And just as you might expect under sexual selection theory, it is the females who are decorated with bright colors and body ornaments, while males are relatively drab. The same goes for the phalaropes, 3 species of graceful shorebirds that breed in Europe and North America. These are among the few examples of a polyandrous, one female and many male, mating system. This rare mating system can also be found among a few human populations, including Tibetans. Male phalaropes are entirely responsible for childcare, building the nests, and feeding the brood, while the female moves on to mate with other males. The male's investment in offspring, then, is greater than the female's, and females compete for males who will take care of their young. And sure enough, in all 3 species, females are colored much brighter than males. Seahorses, pipefish, and phalaropes are the exceptions that prove the rule. Their reverse decoration is exactly what one would expect if the evolutionary explanation of sexual dimorphism is true, but doesn't make sense if these species were specially created. Why choose? Let's return to normal mate choice, in which females are the choosy ones. What exactly are they looking for when they pick a male? This question inspired a famous disagreement in evolutionary biology. Alfred Russel Wallace, as we've seen, was dubious and ultimately wrong about whether females are even choosy. His own theory was that females were less colorful than males because they needed to be camouflaged from predators, while the bright colors and ornaments of males were byproducts of their physiology. He gave no explanation, though, why males shouldn't be camouflaged as well. Darwin's theory was a little better. He felt strongly that male calls, colors, and ornaments evolved via female choice. On what basis were females choosing? His answer was surprising. Pure aesthetics. Darwin saw no reason why females should choose things like elaborate songs or long tails unless they found them intrinsically appealing. His pioneering study of sexual selection, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, 1871, is larded with quaint anthropomorphic descriptions of how female animals are charmed and wooed by various features of males. Yet, as Wallace noted, there was a problem. Did animals, particularly simple ones like beetles and flies, really have an aesthetic sense like our own? Darwin punted on this one, pleading ignorance. Although we have some positive evidence that birds appreciate bright and beautiful objects, as with the bowerbirds of Australia, and although they certainly appreciate the power of song, yet I fully admit that it is astonishing that the females of many birds and some mammals should be endowed with sufficient taste to appreciate ornaments, which we have reason to attribute to sexual selection. And this is even more astonishing in the case of reptiles, fish, and insects. But we really know little about the minds of the lower animals. It turns out that Darwin, though he didn't have all the answers, was closer to the truth than was Wallace. Yes, females do choose, and that choice seems to explain sexual dimorphisms. But it doesn't make sense that females' preference is based solely on aesthetics. Closely related species, like the New Guinea birds of paradise, have males with very different types of plumage and mating behavior. Is what is beautiful to one species so different from what is beautiful to its closest relatives? In fact, we now have a lot of evidence that female preferences are themselves adaptive, because preferring certain types of males helps females spread their genes. Preferences aren't always a matter of random, inborn taste, as Darwin supposed, but in many cases probably evolved by selection. What does a female have to gain by choosing a particular male? There are two answers. She can benefit directly, that is, by picking a male who will help her produce more or healthier young during the act of childcare. Or she can benefit indirectly, by choosing a male who has better genes than those of other males. That is, genes that will give her offspring a leg up in the next generation. Either way, the evolution of female preferences will be favored by selection, natural selection. Take direct benefits. A gene that tells a female to mate with males holding better territories gives her offspring who are better nourished or occupy better nests. They will survive better and reproduce more than young who were not brought up in good territories. This means that the population of young will contain a higher proportion of females carrying the preference gene than it did in the previous generation. As generations pass and evolution continues, every female will eventually carry preference genes. And if there are other mutations that increase preference for better territories, those too will increase in frequency. Over time, the preference for males with better territories will evolve to be stronger and stronger, and this in turn selects on the males to compete more strongly for territories. The female preference evolves hand in hand with the male competition for real estate. Genes that give indirect benefits to choosy females will also spread. Imagine that a male has genes that make him more resistant than other males to disease. A female who mates with such a male will have offspring that are also more disease-resistant. This gives her an evolutionary benefit in choosing that male. Now, imagine as well that there is a gene that enables females to identify these healthier males as mates. If she mates with such a male, that mating will produce sons and daughters who carry both types of genes, those for disease resistance, as well as those for preferring males with disease resistance. In each generation, the most disease-resistant individuals who reproduce better will also carry genes that tell females to choose the most resistant males. As those resistance genes spread by natural selection, the genes for female preference piggyback along with them. In this way, both female preference and disease resistance increase throughout a species. Both of these scenarios explain why females prefer certain kinds of males, but not why they prefer certain features of those males, like bright colors or elaborate plumage. This probably happens because those particular features tell the female that a male will provide larger direct or indirect benefits. Let's look at a few examples of female choice. The house finch of North America is sexually dimorphic for color. Females are brown, but males have bright colors on their head and breast. Males don't defend territories, but do show parental care. Jeff Hill of the University of Michigan found that in one local population, males varied in color from pale yellow through orange to bright red. Wanting to see if color affected reproductive success, he used hair dyes to make males brighter or paler. Sure enough, brighter males obtained significantly more mates than paler ones. And among unmanipulated birds, females deserted the nests of lighter males more often than the nests of brighter males. Why do female finches prefer brighter males? In the same population, Hill showed that brighter males feed their young more often than do lighter males. Females thus get a direct benefit in the form of better provisioning of their offspring by choosing brighter males. Females mated to lighter males might abandon their nests because the young aren't adequately fed. And why do brighter males bring more food? Probably because brightness is a sign of overall health. The red color of male finches comes entirely from the carotenoid pigments in the seeds they eat. They can't make this pigment on their own. Brighter males are therefore better fed and probably healthier in general. Females seem to choose bright males simply because the color tells them, "I'm a male who's better able to stock the family larder." Any genes that make females prefer brighter males gives those females a direct benefit, and so selection would increase that preference. And with the preference in place, any male who was better at converting seeds into bright plumage would also get an advantage because he'll secure more mates. Over time, sexual selection will exaggerate a male's red color. The females stay drab because they gain no benefit from being bright. Indeed, they could suffer by becoming more conspicuous to predators. There are other direct benefits to choosing a healthy and vigorous male. Males can carry parasites or diseases that they can transmit to females, their young, or both. And it's to a female's advantage to avoid these males. A male's color, plumage, and behavior can be a clue to whether he's diseased or infested. Only healthy males can sing a loud song, perform a vigorous display, or grow a bright, handsome set of feathers. If males of a species are normally bright blue, for example, you'd best avoid mating with a pale male. Evolutionary theory shows that females should prefer any trait showing that a male will be a good father. All that's required is that there be some genes increasing the preference for that trait, and that variation in the expression of the trait gives a clue to the male's condition. The rest follows automatically. In sage grouse, parasitic lice produce spots of blood on the male's vocal sac, a feature prominently displayed as a swollen, translucent pouch while they're strutting on the lek. Males who have artificial blood spots painted on their vocal sacs get significantly fewer matings. The spots may tip off females that a male is infested and would literally be a lousy father. Selection will favor genes that promote not only the female preference for unspotted sacs, but also the male trait that indicates his condition. The male's vocal sac will get bigger, and the female's preference for the plain vocal sac will increase. This can lead to the evolution of highly exaggerated features in males, like the ludicrously long tail of the widow bird. The whole process stops only when the male trait becomes so exaggerated that any further increases reduces his survival more than it attracts females, so that his net production of offspring suffers. What about female preferences that give indirect benefits? The most obvious such benefit is what a male always gives to his offspring, his genes. And the same type of traits that show a male is healthy could also show that he's genetically well endowed. Males with brighter colors, longer tails, or louder calls may be able to display these features only if they have genes that make them survive or reproduce better than their competitors. Likewise for males able to build elaborate bowers or pile up large cairns of stones. You can imagine many features that could show a male has genes for greater survival or a greater ability to reproduce. Evolutionary theory shows that in these cases, 3 types of genes will all increase in frequency together. Genes for a male indicator trait, reflecting that he has good genes. Genes that make a female prefer that indicator trait. And, of course, the good genes whose preference is reflected by the indicator. This is a complex scenario, but most evolutionary biologists consider it the best explanation for elaborate male traits and behaviors. But how can we test whether the good genes model is really correct? Are females looking for direct or indirect benefits? A female might spurn a less vigorous or less showy male, but this might reflect not his poor genetic endowment, but simply an environmentally caused debility, such as infection or malnutrition. Such complications make the causes of sexual selection in any given case hard to unravel. Perhaps the best test of the good genes model was done on gray tree frogs by Alison Welsh and her colleagues at the University of Missouri. Male frogs attract females by giving loud calls, liming summer nights in the southern United States. Studies of captive frogs show that females strongly prefer males whose calls are longer. To test whether those males had better genes, researchers stripped eggs from different females, fertilizing half of each female's eggs in vitro with sperm from long-calling males and the other half with sperm from short-calling males. The tadpoles from these crosses were then reared to maturity. The results were dramatic. Offspring from the long-callers grew faster and survived better as tadpoles, were larger at metamorphosis, the time when tadpoles turn into frogs, and grew faster after metamorphosis. Since male gray tree frogs make no contribution to offspring except for sperm, females can get no direct benefits from choosing a long-calling male. This test strongly suggests that a long call is the sign of a healthy male with good genes, and that females who choose those males produce genetically superior offspring. So what about those peacocks? We've seen that females prefer to mate with males who have more eye spots in their tails, and males make no contribution to raising their young. Working at Whipsnade Park, Marion Petrie showed that males with more eye spots produce young that not only grow faster but also survive better. It's likely that by choosing more elaborate tails, females are choosing good genes, for a genetically well-endowed male is more capable of growing an elaborate tail. These 2 studies are all the evidence we have so far that females choose males with better genes. And a fair number of studies have found no association between mate preference and the genetic quality of offspring. Still, the good genes model remains the favored explanation of sexual selection. This belief, in the face of relatively sparse evidence, may partly reflect a preference of evolutionists for strict Darwinian explanations, a belief that females must somehow be able to discriminate among the genes of males. There is, however, a third explanation for sexual dimorphisms, and it's the simplest of all. It's based on what are called sensory bias models. These models assume that the evolution of sexual dimorphisms is driven simply by pre-existing biases in a female's nervous system, and those biases could be a byproduct of natural selection for some function other than finding mates, like finding food. Suppose, for example, that members of a species had evolved a visual preference for red color because that preference helped them locate ripe fruits and berries. If a mutant male appeared with a patch of red on his breast, he might be preferred by females simply because of this pre-existing preference. Red males would then have an advantage, and a color dimorphism could evolve. We assume that red color is disadvantageous in females because it attracts predators. Alternatively, females may also simply like novel features that somehow stimulate their nervous systems. They may, for example, prefer bigger males, males who hold their interest by doing more complex displays, or males who are shaped oddly because they have longer tails. Unlike the models I described earlier, in the sensory bias model, females derive neither direct nor indirect benefits from choosing a particular male. You could test this theory by producing a truly novel trait in males and seeing if females like it. This was done in 2 species of Australian grass finches by Nancy Burley and Richard Szymanski at the University of California. They simply glued a single vertically pointing feather to the heads of males, forming an artificial crest, and then exposed these crested males, along with uncrested controls, to females. Grass finches don't have head crests, although some unrelated species like cockatoos do. Females turned out to show a very strong preference for males sporting white artificial crests over males with either red or green crests, or normal uncrested males. We don't understand why females prefer white, but it may be because they line their nests with white feathers to camouflage their eggs from predators. Similar experiments in frogs and fish also show that females have preferences for traits to which they've never been exposed. The sensory bias model may be important, since natural selection may often create pre-existing preferences that help animals survive and reproduce, and these preferences can be co-opted by sexual selection to create new male traits. Maybe Darwin's theory of animal aesthetics was partly correct, even if he did anthropomorphize female preferences as a taste for the beautiful. Conspicuously missing from this chapter has been any discussion of our own species. What about us? How far theories of sexual selection apply to humans is a complicated question, one that we'll pursue in Chapter 9.